Dusk laid itself over the countryside like a slow-held breath, turning the gravel road into a pale ribbon and the fields on either side into dark, wavering oceans of grass. And when the veteran stepped down from his truck, the crunch under his boots sounded too loud for a world that looked this quiet. He moved with the practiced economy of a man who'd learned long ago that noise is an invitation, one hand closing the door with a gentle push instead of a slam, the other resting for a moment on the collar of the dog at his side. A broad-chested, scar-eyed partner whose calm was usually as steady as the horizon. The air carried the smell of dry earth and dying heat. And somewhere far off, a single bird called out and then stopped as if it had second thoughts. The veteran glanced toward the field that locals said was nothing but weeds and wasted land. A wide, empty place that swallowed sound. And he felt that old, familiar itch beneath the skin. The one that came when the world was pretending too hard. Easy, he murmured, not because the dog was pulling, but because the dog had gone still. Not a hesitant stillness, not curiosity. This was the hard stop of recognition. The dog's head lifted, nostrils flaring, and his ears angled forward like twin blades, locking on something the veteran couldn't see. For a beat, there was only the wind combing through the grass in soft waves, the sky bruising purple at the edges, the kind of calm that makes people believe in safety. Then the dog let out a howl. It wasn't the bright social call of an animal greeting the night. It wasn't loneliness. It wasn't excitement. It came out low and torn, threaded with urgency, like a warning siren translated into flesh. The sound cut through the field and didn't echo back, as if the earth itself had swallowed it. And the veteran felt his spine tighten, because he'd heard that tone before in other places, other years, when unseen danger sat just beyond the edge of vision. He turned in a slow, deliberate scan, eyes moving over the tall grass, the scattered fence posts, the faint dip in the land where a drainage ditch ran like a scar. And he saw nothing but shadows and swaying stalks. "Show me," he whispered. And the dog stepped forward one pace, then another, but his body stayed coiled, ready, protective. The veteran's hand drifted to his phone out of habit, light, casual, yet his awareness sharpened, every sense leaning in. The wind shifted, colder now, and the grass bowed in one direction, a unified ripple, until one section didn't. About 30 yards out, a patch of tall stems trembled in a different rhythm, jerking as if something beneath was pushing through. The veteran narrowed his eyes, holding his breath, watching for a deer, a coyote, anything that would make the pattern make sense. The dog's throat rumbled, not loud but deep enough to feel in the ribs, and his paws planted like anchors. The grass moved again, against the wind this time, parting in a thin, unnatural line, and for a split second the veteran saw a shape inside it. Not the silhouette of an animal, but something lower, wronger, like a body trying not to be seen. The dog howled again, sharper now, and the veteran's calm snapped into focus, a switch thrown in the dark. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He simply stepped forward, slow and controlled, eyes fixed on that moving patch of field, because whatever was out there had just answered the dog's warning. And the empty land had revealed its first lie. Earlier that morning, the world had looked harmless, almost tender, washed in soft gold as the sun climbed over low hills and poured light across a rural town that seemed built from quiet routines. A diner sign buzzing faintly above steamed-up windows, a feed store with sacks stacked like sandbags, a church bell that rang once and let the sound drift away over fields that went on forever. The veteran rolled in without any announcement, his truck dusted with road grit, his posture loose but alert, The kind of man who didn't scan for attention, but still registered every exit, every face, every place where a shadow could hide something sharp. He parked near the edge of town, stepped out, and the dog followed like a second heartbeat, close, calm, watching. People glanced at them the way small towns do, not hostile, just measuring, curious about outsiders who didn't introduce themselves. The veteran gave them nothing to hold on to beyond a polite nod and eyes that didn't linger. He wasn't the type to tell stories about what he'd done or where he'd been. He carried his history the way he carried everything else, quietly, with discipline. Because for him, the past wasn't a badge. It was training. And training was meant to keep you alive. He walked the dog past storefronts and old pickup trucks, past a bulletin board layered with flyers for lost cats and church bake sales, past a sheriff's office that looked more decorative than functional. And the dog took in the town with a working animal's seriousness, sniffing lampposts, tracking scents, pausing at the alley behind the diner where the air smelled faintly of bleach and old grease. On the surface, it was the kind of place that sold an illusion. Tidy porches, slow smiles, wide roads leading to wider land. But the veteran had learned something in harsher landscapes. Peaceful scenery doesn't mean peaceful people. An open space is the perfect place to bury bad decisions. He stopped at the diner for coffee, sat where he could see the door and the windows, and listened more than he spoke. Locals traded soft gossip between bites of toast. Equipment missing from a farm outside town, a teenager who'd run off, even though his mother swore he'd never leave without his meds. A bitter joke about certain families getting away with things because that's just how it is here. Every sentence landed with a shrug, like resignation had become the town's dialect, and the veteran felt that same itch under the skin. A warning not from sound, but from absence. The things they weren't saying. Later, he drove the back roads, the dog riding shotgun with his chin on the window edge, watching hedgerows and barns slide past like frames in an old film. The land was beautiful in a lonely way. Fields stitched together by fences, drainage ditches glinting like thin knives of water, clusters of trees standing like witnesses who had seen too much. At a crossroads, he pulled over to check a map, and while the dog sniffed the verge, the veteran noticed a trail of tire marks cutting off the road toward an expanse of untended field. No farmhouse nearby, no equipment shed, nothing that explained why vehicles had been going in and out. He watched for a long moment, then drove on, telling himself it was none of his business, because that was the rule civilians lived by. But the rule he'd lived by before was different. If something feels wrong, it usually is. By afternoon, the sky had gone high and clear, the kind of blue that tricks you into forgetting storms exist, and as the sun began to tilt west, the veteran aimed his truck toward the outskirts, thinking he'd pass through and keep moving. He didn't know yet that this town's quiet wasn't peace. It was pressure. He didn't know yet that the field he'd seen from the road wasn't just land. And he certainly didn't know that by dusk, his dog would howl at nothing and force the truth into the open where it had been waiting for years. The dog at the veteran's side wasn't the kind you bought on impulse because the kids wanted something fluffy. He moved with purpose, with a working patience that made even ordinary walks feel like patrols. And if you watched closely, you could see the skill in the smallest things. The way his nose didn't just sniff, it sampled, sorting layers of scent like pages in a book, separating yesterday's rain from gasoline residue, separating rabbit trails from the sharp, sour tang of human fear. The veteran had raised him through training that looked gentle to outsiders, but was built on precise repetition. Tracking through brush without trampling a scene, pausing at disturbed soil, circling into the wind, learning to read a trembling shift in grass, the way a seasoned sailor reads a sudden change in water. In the service, the dog had been more than an asset. He'd been a second set of senses that never got tired, never got distracted, never convinced itself a threat was probably nothing. The veteran knew what humans do in peaceful places. They relax into assumptions. They let pretty sunsets anesthetize caution. They trust their eyes as if sight were the only truth. But his partner taught him otherwise. The dog could smell adrenaline before a voice cracked, could hear the faintest scrape of metal under fabric, could tell the difference between wind flattening grass and weight pressing it down. He could spot the break in pattern that the human brain loves to ignore. One bird that stops singing too abruptly, one patch of dirt too smooth, one fence wire that's been cut and twisted back like a lie told with pliers. The veteran didn't talk much about it. Not because he was secretive for drama, but because words didn't improve what was already proven. He'd seen the dog freeze at the edge of a road before an ambush point was even visible. He'd seen him refuse a doorway because the air inside smelled wrong. Chemical, new paint, fresh fear, only to find later that something had been waiting on the other side. That's why the veteran had a rule, as hard and simple as a trigger discipline. When your partner signals danger, you don't argue. You don't debate. You don't get proud and pretend you know better. You act. The world could laugh at you later if it turned out to be a false alarm. But you couldn't laugh if you were dead. So when the dog's posture changed, even by an inch, the veteran's inner gears shifted with it, plans forming without panic. Widen your space, note your exits, keep your hands free, keep your voice low, read the environment the way the dog reads the air. The bond between them wasn't sentimental, though it carried loyalty as deep as blood. It was built from saved moments, from trust earned in darkness, from the shared understanding that one of them could sense what the other couldn't, and neither would ever betray that truth. Out here, in this quiet town with its friendly faces and its long, empty stretches of land, that bond was going to matter more than anyone realized. Because if the dog decided something was wrong, the veteran wasn't going to stand there and hope it went away. He was going to move. He was going to protect. He was going to do what he'd always done when danger tried to pass itself off as ordinary. He was going to treat the warning like it was real, even before anyone else could see why. By late afternoon, the veteran had promised himself he'd keep moving, just pass through, grab what he needed, and let the town fade into the rear view like so many others. But the road that skirted the outskirts pulled him alongside that wide field again, and something in the air tightened like a wire. He slowed without meaning to, eyes drifting across the expanse of grass, and the first thing he noticed wasn't what he saw. It was what he didn't. No insects ticking in the heat, no birds hopping fence lines, no distant caws or fluttering silhouettes. The land looked alive, but it sounded dead. And silence like that wasn't calm. It was a sign that everything small and smart had already evacuated. The dog shifted in the passenger seat, lifting his head, and the veteran felt the change through the leash before he even opened the door. The tension, the sudden focus, the way his partner's breathing shortened, measured, as if he'd stepped into a room where someone had whispered his name. The veteran pulled onto the shoulder where gravel gave way to weeds, killed the engine, and for a moment sat listening, letting the hush press against the windows. When he stepped out, the air hit him with dry warmth tinged by something faintly metallic, and the dog jumped down, not bounding the way pets do, but landing with precision, paws testing the ground like it might lie. He moved a few feet, nose dropping low, then lifted high again as if triangulating scent layers, and began to circle, once, twice, each loop tighter than the last, like he was drawing a boundary around an invisible threat. The veteran watched the grass sway in long strokes, the sun painting it copper, and his eyes searched for the obvious explanation. A rabbit? A snake? A coyote bedded down? But the dog's body told a different story. His posture went rigid, spine straight, tail low but steady, and the muscles along his shoulders bunched beneath his coat as if he was bracing for impact. He stopped at a precise spot near the edge where the grass grew taller, leaned forward, and inhaled so sharply the veteran could hear it. Then the dog howled. One long, jagged call that sounded like a flare fired into a dark sky. The veteran's hand tightened on the leash. Not because the dog was out of control, but because the message was unmistakable. Warning. The dog's head snapped toward the same patch again, nostrils flaring, and he howled a second time, louder, as if whatever was out there hadn't listened the first time. That's when a voice floated from behind them, casual, almost amused. "Ain't nothing out there," a local man said, strolling up from a nearby mailbox like he owned the whole horizon. He had the posture of someone who'd lived his entire life in a place where questions were treated like insults. Hands shoved in his pockets, eyes narrowed with the bored confidence of a man who enjoyed watching outsiders look foolish. "Just weeds and wind. Dogs chasing ghosts." The veteran didn't answer right away. He kept his gaze on the field, letting the dog's howl fade into the heavy air, and the local chuckled as if the matter was settled. But the dog didn't settle. He dug his paws into the gravel, pulling forward a fraction, not panicked, determined, then threw his head back and howled again, shorter this time, sharper, like a siren shifting pitch. The local's smile faltered for just a breath, so quick most people would miss it. But the veteran didn't. The veteran caught it the way he caught everything. The tiny break in performance. The fleeting look toward the field that wasn't curiosity, but calculation. "He's never done that for nothing," the veteran said finally, voice low, controlled, and the local scoffed again, louder now, as if volume could smother the truth. "It's a field," the man insisted, waving a hand. "You city folks see drama everywhere." The veteran leaned slightly, eye narrowing at the grass line, because even as the local spoke, the wind pushed in one direction and the grass bowed with it, except for one patch that moved wrong, trembling against the flow like something underneath had shifted. The dog's growl rolled out, deep and steady, and the veteran felt his own calm harden into resolve. Whatever this was, it wasn't empty. And his partner, his trained, loyal, battle-tested partner, was refusing to let it stay hidden. He moved the way he'd been taught to move when the world might be booby-trapped with consequences, slow enough to read the ground, steady enough not to spook whatever was hiding, controlled enough that his body never telegraphed panic. The veteran kept the dog close, leash short but not tight, and walked the field's edge as if he were tracing the border of an invisible crime scene, boots landing on gravel and packed soil instead of the soft earth where prints could vanish. The local lingered behind them, arms folded now, impatience sharpening into irritation. But the veteran didn't give him the satisfaction of eye contact. His attention was on the grass line, on the way the stalks leaned and recovered, on the unnatural stillness where even the wind seemed to hesitate. Then he saw it, a patch of flattened grass about the size of a torso, pressed down in a clean oval that didn't match the surrounding patterns. Wind flattened grass in broad, sweeping gestures. This was different. This was weight. Concentrated, deliberate, like something had been held there long enough to leave a bruise on the land. He crouched and angled his head, letting the low sun rake across the blades, and the detail snapped into focus. The stems were bent not in one direction, but crisscrossed, mashed, as if knees had shifted, as if a body had struggled. A few feet farther in, another flattened patch appeared, then another, spaced like steps, but too smeared for footprints, like someone had been moved rather than walking. The veteran's throat tightened. He'd seen tracks like this before in places that didn't end well. The dog tugged forward, nose sweeping low, locked onto the flattened lane as if following a scent trail laid in adrenaline. For a moment the veteran let him lead, carefully, one measured step at a time, eyes scanning for wire glints, for fresh soil, for anything out of place. The local muttered something about wasting time, but his voice sounded thinner now, and the veteran filed that away too. The dog's breathing changed as they neared the first flattened patch. It grew faster, sharper, and then, without warning, he stopped and recoiled. Not a playful hop back, a hard, instinctive retreat, as if he'd put his nose too close to a flame. Hackles rose along his spine, turning his coat into a ridge, and a low growl vibrated from deep in his chest. The veteran's hand tightened on the leash, and he followed the dog's gaze to a spot in the grass that looked no different than any other. Until the wind shifted and the scent reached him too, faint but unmistakable. Something metallic, acrid, like old pennies and cold steel. Fear had a smell, and so did restraint. Chain, cuff, the sharp bite of something manufactured. The dog edged sideways, positioning himself between the veteran and the grass as if shielding him, eyes fixed, pupils tight. The veteran swallowed, eyes narrowing, and leaned just enough to see past a tangle of weeds. The flattened grass didn't stop at the edge. It formed a line, a narrow corridor pressed into the field, disappearing into taller growth like a path someone didn't want found. "That's wind," the local insisted behind them, too quickly, too loudly, and the veteran didn't answer. He didn't need to. The dog growled again, steady and certain, and the veteran felt the truth assembling in his mind like a weapon being built. The field wasn't empty. It had been used. The flattened patches weren't random. They were a story the ground was trying to tell. And whatever the dog was smelling, fear and metal, meant someone had been here under pressure, possibly trapped, possibly dragged, possibly silenced. The veteran rose slowly, eyes never leaving that pressed-down corridor, and the local's boots shifted on gravel, a nervous adjustment. In the last stretch of daylight, the grass ahead rippled once, small, contained, against the direction of the wind, and the veteran's calm deepened into something colder than anger. Because now he wasn't searching for an animal anymore. He was searching for a person, or for what was left behind when a person was treated like cargo. The veteran had just shifted his weight to reach for his phone when the sound hit first. An engine pushing too hard for a back road, tires chewing gravel like teeth. Then the vehicle came into view, a dark pickup barreling down the dirt lane as if it had been summoned by the dog's howl. It didn't roll in like a neighbor stopping to chat. It arrived like an interruption, a warning in steel and speed. And the veteran felt the dog stiffen beside him as the truck skidded near the shoulder and stopped with a final crunch that sent a spray of stones into the weeds. The driver's door swung open before the dust had even settled. And a man stepped out, wearing confidence the way some men wear a jacket. Casual, automatic, meant to announce ownership without a single word. He was broad through the chest, heavy in the shoulders, baseball cap low, boots clean enough to suggest he didn't do real work in them, and the set of his mouth said he was used to people moving when he spoke. He didn't glance at the sky or the road or the town behind. His eyes went right to the field, right to that pressed-down corridor of grass, right to the exact spot the dog was guarding with raised hackles, and the flicker was quick, half a second of calculation. before he snapped his attention to the veteran as if the veteran were the problem that needed removing. "You lost?" he called, voice loud, friendly in the way a smile can still be a threat. The local man near the mailbox suddenly found a reason to look at his shoes, shifting his stance like he didn't want to be recorded in the same frame as what came next. The veteran stayed still, shoulders relaxed, leash firm in his hand, and met the newcomer's gaze without challenging it, just holding it, patient like a door that wouldn't open no matter how hard you pushed. "Just stopped for a minute," the veteran said, tone mild. The bully took a few steps closer, not rushing, but closing space the way predators do, making the distance smaller on purpose. "Well, you can stop somewhere else," he replied. And there it was. The pressure. Not a request, not a conversation. A decision delivered like an order. The dog rumbled low, a warning that didn't need translation. And the bully's eyes dipped to the animal with a flash of annoyance, then back to the veteran's face. "Nice dog," he added, the word sweet but the meaning sharp. Would be a shame if he got himself hurt, sticking his nose where it don't belong. The veteran didn't flinch. He filed away the phrasing, hurt, belong, words that told you how a man's mind worked. He subtly angled his body so the dog was behind his left leg, protected, and so his own view of the field stayed open. "Whose land is it?" he asked, quiet. The bully's mouth curled. "Mine, if I say it's mine," he answered. And then he took another step, close enough that the veteran could smell smokeless tobacco and something bitter underneath, a nervous chemical edge. "Here's what's going to happen," the bully continued, voice dropping like he was doing the veteran a favor. "You're going to get back in that truck and you're going to drive on. You don't need to be out here, and you sure as hell don't need to be setting your dog on my property." The dog's ears pinned forward again, and his head snapped toward the grass corridor as if he heard something deeper in the field, something the wind couldn't make. Then he stiffened, growl turning into a steady, vibrating line of sound. The bully noticed. His eyes flicked again to the exact spot, too fast, too telling, and his jaw tightened as if he was fighting the urge to look longer. That was the giveaway. If this was just weeds and wind, he wouldn't care where the dog stared. He wouldn't arrive at speed. He wouldn't threaten. He wouldn't be sweating under a cap in the cool edge of late day. The veteran kept his voice level, almost calm enough to be boring. "He's trained," he said. "He reacts for a reason." The bully's smile vanished. "Yeah?" he snapped. "Well, around here, my reason is the only one that matters." He shifted his stance, hips squaring, hands loose at his sides, like he wanted the option to grab the leash or shove the veteran and pretend it was an accident. The local man behind them cleared his throat and said nothing. The dog held his ground, hackles high, eyes locked on the field. And the veteran felt the moment tighten, the air thickening, the daylight thinning, the bully's impatience sharpening into something dangerous. Because now the threat wasn't theoretical anymore. It had a face, a truck, and a sense of entitlement. And every time those eyes flicked back toward the disturbed grass, the veteran understood more clearly. Whatever was out there, this man needed it to stay hidden. The bully's patience snapped the way cheap plastic snaps, sudden, loud, and irreversible. And the shift was so immediate, the veteran felt it before he saw it, like the air itself tightening around them. "I said move," the man barked. And when the veteran didn't obey fast enough, didn't flinch, didn't apologize, didn't shrink, the bully closed the last step of distance and reached out with a hard, possessive hand, fingers hooking toward the leash as if the dog were property to be yanked aside. The veteran's grip tightened and his arm rotated, just enough to deny the grab, a small motion, economical. And that denial lit something ugly behind the bully's eyes. "Don't make this a thing," the bully hissed. Voice lower now, meant to go under the skin, meant to feel like a private warning. He shoved the veteran's shoulder with the heel of his palm, not enough to knock him down, just enough to test whether he'd fold, just enough to make the aggression undeniable. Gravel shifted beneath the veteran's boot, but he didn't stumble. He absorbed the push like he'd absorbed worse in harsher places, letting his body stay loose while his mind clicked into a different mode. Threat assessment, distance, exits, witnesses, weapons. The dog moved instantly, not with wild lunging, but with disciplined control, stepping forward into the space between them, body low, head slightly down, shoulders broad, an unspoken wall. His growl deepened into something that vibrated in the chest, a sound that didn't beg or bluff, only promised consequence if the line was crossed. The bully's hand jerked back as if he'd touched something hot. And for a brief second he looked at the dog the way people look at a loaded gun, respectful for all the wrong reasons. But then the bully leaned in again, trying to reclaim dominance with proximity. "You think you're gonna scare me with a mutt?" he spat, and his eyes darted to the veteran's truck, then to the empty road, gauging how alone they were. The local man by the mailbox had gone quiet as stone, face turned away, pretending he didn't see, the town's old habit of survival. Don't be the one who gets involved. The bully lifted a finger and jabbed it toward the veteran's chest, stopping just short of contact. "You're not from here," he said, each word a weight. "You don't know how things work. You roll through, you take your pictures, you tell your little stories. And then what? You think someone's gonna care?" He took another half step, and the dog matched it, perfectly, keeping himself between them, eyes locked, muscles tight but controlled, like a soldier holding position. The veteran's face stayed calm, almost blank. But behind that calm, his mind was building a map with ruthless clarity. The bully had arrived too fast, too angry. He had threatened the dog specifically, not the veteran. He kept flicking his eyes toward that flattened corridor of grass like a man checking a locked door behind him. That meant fear. Not fear of a dog bite. Fear of what the dog might find. Fear of what the veteran might record. Fear of a secret that couldn't survive daylight. The veteran took a slow breath, letting it settle his heartbeat, and softened his voice. Not to soothe the bully, but to keep control of the temperature. "If it's empty," he said, "why do you care?" The bully's nostrils flared. For a heartbeat, the question landed like a punch, because it was simple, and simple questions are the ones liars hate most. The bully's gaze snapped back to the field again, just a flick, but it was enough. The veteran saw it. The dog saw it. And in that split-second glance, the veteran caught something else too. A faint tremor in the bully's jaw, the slightest sheen of sweat at his temple despite the cooling air. The bully wasn't just angry. He was scared. "Because I said so," the bully growled, and his hand dropped toward his waistband in a gesture that might have been nothing, or might have been a warning of something worse. The dog's growl rose in response, still controlled, but edged now, and the veteran adjusted his stance, turning slightly so his shoulders shielded the dog and his eyes still held the bully. He didn't want to fight, but he also understood that silence can be a weapon, especially in places where people learn to keep their mouths shut to stay safe. The bully was counting on that silence, counting on intimidation, counting on the idea that an outsider would leave rather than risk trouble. The veteran didn't move. He didn't posture. He simply stayed, steady as a stake in the ground, And in the space between the bully's threat and the dog's warning, one thought kept sharpening into a blade. Why are you scared of an empty field? The veteran let the bully's anger hang in the air like fog, while his own mind stayed clear. Because clarity was how you survived men who thought noise was power. And without making a show of it, he slid his phone from his pocket as if he were only checking the time. The screen lit his palm for a heartbeat, then dimmed as he angled it down, thumb tapping once, record, so quietly the bully didn't register the shift until it was too late. The lens caught everything the veteran's eyes had already filed. The bully's stance squared like a challenge. The twitch of his jaw when the dog growled. The way his gaze kept snapping toward the pressed grass corridor as if he was guarding it with his pupils. The veteran took a slow step back, not retreating but widening his space. And as he did, he tilted the phone toward the ground, letting the camera drink in the dirt road's story. Tire marks gouged too deep for casual driving, a skid where gravel had been shoved into a crescent, a churned patch where someone had accelerated hard, as if leaving in a hurry mattered more than traction. He panned along the shoulder where weeds had been crushed by a vehicle pulling off-road, then lifted the lens, smooth, deliberate, until the bully's license plate filled the frame, clean and centered, numbers sharp enough to read even in fading light. The bully noticed then. His eyes narrowed. "Put that away," he snapped, stepping forward. But the veteran didn't answer. He simply shifted his weight, keeping his voice and his breathing calm, and snapped two still photos, one of the plate, one of the tread pattern, because stills and video together were harder to misunderstand. The dog, meanwhile, moved with that same eerie certainty, nose working like a Geiger counter sweeping for radiation, drifting away from the bully's shadow toward the field's edge. He sniffed the flattened lane again, then veered suddenly as if a new scent had cut across it, tail stiff, ears forward, and the veteran followed at a measured distance, filming the corridor where grass had been pressed down in a straight line that didn't match any animal trail. Too narrow, too deliberate, like a dragged path. The local bully kept talking, louder, demanding the veteran leave, but his words had lost their easy swagger. They came out sharp, rushed, and threaded with panic. And every time the dog paused, the bully's eyes flicked toward him, like a man watching a fuse burn closer to powder. The dog pushed into a tangle of weeds and stopped so abruptly his paws dug into the soil, shoulders tense, head lowered. A low growl rolled out of him, not at the bully this time, but at the ground itself. And the veteran crouched carefully, phone still rolling, aware of how fragile truth could be if you stepped on it. He parted the grass with 2 fingers and saw disturbed earth, freshly scuffed, then clumsily covered, like someone had tried to hide a mark by smoothing it. The dog huffed once, urgent, then pressed his nose along the edge and whined. A small broken sound that carried more meaning than any shouted threat. The veteran found it half buried beneath damp soil, a strip of cloth, pale at first glance, then darker where it had been stained and ground in. He lifted it with 2 fingers, turning it slowly under the camera so the lens could capture the frayed edges, the torn seam, the tiny red-brown specks that made the veteran's stomach go cold. It wasn't just cloth. It was tied to something. Thin cord, synthetic, looped in a knot that looked practiced, not accidental, the kind of knot made by hands that wanted something to stay put. The dog's hackles rose again, and he backed off a step, as if the scent coming off it was too charged, too human, too full of fear to hold in his nose for long. The bully's voice cracked. "Don't touch that," he barked. And the words came out too fast, too raw. Less command, more desperation. And in that moment, the veteran knew he'd crossed from suspicion into certainty. People didn't panic over grass. They panicked over evidence. The veteran kept his face blank, but his heart beat heavier as he scanned the surrounding ground. Flattened patches like knees had been pressed down, faint streaks where something had been dragged, a glint deeper in the weeds that looked like metal catching the last slice of sun. He didn't lunge for it. He didn't rush into the field like a hero in a movie. He did what he'd learned to do when the world tried to erase its own crimes. He recorded, he documented, he preserved. He held the cloth up again, making sure the camera saw the knot and the cord and the stains. Then lowered it carefully into a clean plastic bag he kept in his glove compartment. Old habit, old discipline. Because chain of custody mattered if justice was ever going to stick. The dog stood tight at his knee, eyes locked on the corridor, and the bully, sweating now, breathing too hard, took another step forward as if he might snatch the bag, might snatch the phone, might snatch back control of the story. The veteran's voice came out low as gravel, calm enough to be lethal. "If it's empty," he said, locking eyes with the bully, "why does it have someone's clothing in it?" And the field answered for the bully in the only language it had left. Another rustle against the wind. Another unnatural shift in the tall grass. As if whatever secret lay farther in had just realized it was no longer alone. He didn't stay to argue with a man who was already unraveling, because the veteran understood something the town had forgotten. You don't win against a bully by matching his volume. You win by taking away his control of the narrative. The moment the grass shifted again and the bully's eyes flared with panic, the veteran made his decision with the same crisp certainty he'd used in other high-stakes moments. Act now, explain later. He eased backward toward his truck, not turning his back, keeping the dog tucked close at his left knee. And when the bully lunged a half step as if to grab the bag or slap the phone out of his hand, the dog slid forward in a low, controlled block that stopped the man with nothing but presence. The bully hesitated, just long enough, and that was all the veteran needed. He got the dog into the cab, shut the door with a firm click, and only then did he let his phone rise to chest level, camera still rolling, capturing the bully's face as he barked threats that sounded more like a man pleading for time. The veteran didn't respond. He ended the recording, saved it, and immediately backed it up. Because he'd learned the hard way that evidence that only lives on one device is evidence waiting to die. Then he drove. Not far. Just enough to break line of sight, enough to get cell signal without being close enough to be boxed in. And he pulled onto a small turnout near a stand of pines where the air smelled cleaner and the road bent away from the field. The dog sat tall in the passenger seat, eyes bright, ears pricked, still tuned to danger even as the truck idled. The veteran's fingers moved fast now, not frantic, efficient, scrolling to a contact name he hadn't used in months but had never deleted. A former unit liaison. A state-level investigator who owed him a favor. Someone outside the gravitational pull of this little town. He hit call. It rang once, twice. On the third ring, a voice answered, wary and guarded. The veteran didn't waste words. He gave coordinates, a description of the field, the vehicle plate, the threats, the dragged grass corridor, the cloth and cord in a sealed bag. He spoke in clean, factual lines, the way you do when you need someone to understand the stakes immediately. On the other end, the silence changed, shifted into attention. "Do not go back in there alone," the voice said. "All business now. Stay put. I'm looping in the nearest non-local unit. If what you're saying is what I think it is, you just stepped into something bigger." The veteran stared through the windshield at the fading light and felt the phrase land like a weight. Bigger. Because the bully hadn't acted like a man defending property. He'd acted like a man guarding a pipeline of secrets. "Local sheriff?" the voice asked. The veteran's eyes flicked to the diner, to the resigned shrug in every conversation, to the way the townsfolk looked away when the bully arrived. "I'm not risking a call that gets lost," he said. "Not until you have someone you trust on scene." "Understood," the voice replied. "Send me the files. Now." The veteran did. Video, photos, plate, tire marks, watching the upload bar creep like a fuse burning in reverse, turning danger into documentation. But he knew evidence alone wasn't enough. He needed a witness, someone who could anchor this to names and patterns and history. He needed a crack in the town's silence. So he made a second call, this time to a number he'd picked up earlier at the diner without even trying. The waitress who'd refilled his coffee and, while doing it, had murmured, "If you're smart, you don't stop out by Miller's Field after dark." At the time, he'd filed it away as superstition. Now it looked like a warning. She answered on the first ring, breathy, nervous. "It's me," the veteran said, voice gentle but firm. "The guy with the dog. I need you to listen." A pause, then. "I saw him out there," she whispered. Don't say his name." That told the veteran everything about how fear lived in this town. "I'm not calling local," he said. "I've contacted outside authority. But I need someone from town who's willing to tell the truth. You said the field wasn't safe. Why?" Another long beat, as if she were standing at the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to jump. Then she exhaled, and her voice came out thin, shaking. "Because people go missing," she said. "Not big missing, quiet missing, runaway missing. And everybody pretends it's normal because the ones with money, they make it normal." The veteran closed his eyes for half a second, letting the scope expand in his mind like a map unfolding. "Meet me," he said, "somewhere public. Bright, cameras." "The gas station by Route 6, she whispered. 10 minutes. "But if he sees me—" "He won't," the veteran promised, and he meant it. Because now this wasn't a lone confrontation in a field. Now it was an operation. Secure the evidence. Protect the witness. Keep the dog close. Keep moving in light and visibility. Return only with backup before night sealed the truth under darkness again. He hung up, checked the rear view for headlights, then eased the truck back onto the road, not toward the field, but toward the gas station's fluorescent glow. Because in towns like this, the safest place to prepare for a storm is right under the lights, where cowards hate to be seen. Night did what it always does in open country. It erased the edges, swallowed the landmarks, turned the field into a black ocean where the wind sounded like surf and every patch of tall grass could hide a heartbeat. And under that darkness, the empty land finally showed its true nature. Not peaceful, but hungry. The veteran parked with his headlights angled away, letting outside authority take the front position when they arrived. A pair of non-local vehicles rolling in with muted lights, radios whispering, boots crunching gravel with purpose instead of bravado. The waitress, pale and trembling, stood beside an investigator and spoke in tight, careful sentences, finally naming what the town had been choking on for years. Missing folks written off as runaways. A bully family with property no one questioned. A sheriff who always shrugged. Reports that never went anywhere. The veteran didn't narrate. He handed over the bagged cloth, the photos, the plate, the recording, and let professionals slot it into a bigger picture that was already forming in their eyes. Then they moved. Flashlights cutting narrow cones through the dark, shoulders tight, steps measured, toward the field's edge where the dog had first howled. The veteran unclipped the leash, but kept 2 fingers hooked in the collar, giving his partner freedom to work without losing connection. and the dog flowed forward like he belonged to the night. Nose down, then up, tracking scent on invisible currents. Twice he paused, ears angling as if listening for something, too soft for human hearing. The grass corridor appeared under flashlight like a scar, pressed, straight, unnatural, and the dog followed it without hesitation, leading them deeper into the black, where the air grew colder and the smell of metal returned, sharper now, threaded with sweat and damp soil. The veteran's nerves stayed disciplined, not because he wasn't afraid, but because he'd learned fear could be used like fuel if you didn't let it steer. A sudden rustle made the deputies lift their lights, weapons ready, but the dog didn't bark. He surged ahead and stopped, tail stiff, body low, and gave a single sharp huff that said, "Here." The beam found it, a depression hidden under a mat of weeds. Old boards laid over a shallow pit, half covered with grass to make it vanish at a glance. It wasn't clever. It was cruel. One officer knelt, pried the boards up, and the smell that rose was human and trapped. Stale breath, sweat, fear soaked into darkness. A muffled sound followed, a tiny, desperate scrape, and everyone's blood turned to ice at once. "There's someone down there," the investigator said, voice clipped. And the veteran felt the dog press forward, whining now, urgent and protective, as if trying to pull the person back into the world with sheer will. They moved fast, hands reaching, boards coming off. A flashlight plunged into the hole, and the beam revealed a figure curled tight in the dirt, wrists marked, eyes wide and glassy from hours of panic. Alive. Barely, but alive. A medic hauled them up with careful strength, wrapping them in a blanket that looked too clean for what they'd survived, and the dog eased closer, sniffed once, then stood guard at their side like an oath fulfilled. Out on the road, engines approached again. One familiar pickup rolling in too fast, too confident, until it saw the non-local units and braked hard, the bully stepping out with that same ownership in his shoulders that now looked ridiculous under the authorities' lights. His mouth open to bully a story into existence. Private property, misunderstanding. You can't. Until the investigator lifted the veteran's phone toward him and played back his own threats, crisp and undeniable. And the bully's face changed in real time. The confidence draining, the color leaving, the bravado collapsing into something small and furious. "You don't know who you're messing with," he spat. But the line landed flat, because the town was watching now. People drawn by lights and sirens, standing at a distance like deer at the edge of a clearing, and for the first time, they weren't looking away. The waitress stood behind the investigator, shaking but upright, and when the bully's eyes found her, she didn't drop her gaze. She held it, and that quiet defiance hit him harder than any punch. The cuffs went on with a metallic click that echoed across the field like a gavel, and the bully's shoulders sagged as if the weight, years, finally settled where it belonged. Later, when the rescued person was in an ambulance and the officers were stringing tape and taking statements, the veteran stood at the field's edge with his dog pressed against his leg, feeling the town's silence shift. Not gone, not healed, but cracked open enough for air to enter. People murmured to each other, stunned, ashamed, relieved. Some cried quietly. Others stared at the ground as if seeing it for the first time. The veteran didn't take credit. He didn't make a speech. He scratched the dog behind the ears and looked out over the grass that had hidden a life in plain sight. And the lesson landed in the hush left behind by sirens fading into the distance. The loudest threats aren't always the real danger. Sometimes the real danger is the quiet, practiced silence that keeps evil comfortable. Sometimes it takes the steady nerve of a disciplined protector and the wrong kind of howl from a loyal dog to break that silence open. Because that field wasn't empty. It never had been. And if not for one dog refusing to be fooled by appearances, the truth would have stayed buried. Another secret breathing under grass while the world drove by and called it nothing.